Okay, hi, how you doing? I've got another dialogues today to take you through. So this is one I did a little while ago. It's philosophy dialogues. Science is an enemy of Christian faith. I really like doing this one. I think there's a lot of routes you can take through this, but in my version, what I'm going to try and do is show you how you can use particularly the scholars that you've had to look at for philosophy and also for the Christianity section of the course, particularly Christianity and science in year 2. You may have come across this question before. You may even have had a go at it yourself, because I think it's one of the specimen questions. So it's out there. This is my take on it. Okay, so no introduction, don't need one. I'm going straight in with a little bit of AO1 bleeding into AO2, like I normally do. On the one hand, it could be argued that this statement is true because scientific advances have posed a threat to traditional Christian beliefs and authority on many occasions. This has led to some atheists arguing that the Christian faith has been undermined to the extent that it has lost a lot of its meaning. So I'm making a claim there, and because I'm making a claim, I need to back it up. So this is how I do it. For example, as science is able to tell us more about the origins of human life through the theory of evolution and subsequent developments, some would argue that the role of God is diminished until he serves only to fill in the gaps of what we do not understand. Atheist thinkers such as Richard Dawkins argue that the natural conclusion to this is that science will one day answer all our questions and any concept of God will become irrelevant, thus making Christianity irrelevant too. So I'm starting off with a paragraph about why the statement might have some truth in it, and I'm using this argument of God of the gaps, which you will have studied. Now, if God of the gaps is accurate, if the people who put forward that argument are right, then eventually Christianity is going to disappear, and it will be because of science. But in the next paragraph, I need to push back and argue about why that might not be true. So I take it from a Christian perspective. However, many Christians reject this analysis and argue that anyone who makes the God of the gaps argument has missed the point. The concept of God in Christian belief is much richer and broader than simply an answer to unanswered questions. Furthermore, many Christians would argue that the advancement of science actually enhances their faith instead of threatening it. Now, I haven't put an example in there. I could do, though. I could put in someone like Francis Collins, who was one of the guys who headed up the Human Genome Project and actually came to have a faith as a result of his scientific discoveries. I could use Polkinghorne, but I'm going to use Polkinghorne quite a lot later on. So there could go an example in there, but timing is an issue. You may not be able to say everything you want to say, and you've got to be aware of that. Most major denominations of Christianity have accepted the scientific truth of the Big Bang and the theory of evolution, arguing that such advances in our understanding are to be welcomed because they help Christians to understand God's creation more fully. The Catholic Church sees the Big Bang as the means by which God created the universe, and evolution is viewed by many as evidence of God's ongoing creativity. Therefore, it's clearly not true that scientific progress must be seen as an enemy of Christian faith, because if faith is strengthened by science, it would be nonsensical to see science as an enemy of faith. Right, really important point that I want to put on your radar here. The Catholic Church does not take the book of Genesis literally. It never did. Aquinas didn't, even back in his day. Now, I'm going to go on and talk about people who take the Bible literally in a minute, but it's not the Catholic Church, it's not the Church of England, it's not really any of the big established denominations. There are a lot of people who do, but they're not the majority of Christians. Super important that you get your head around that. Taking the Bible literally, being a creationist, being a fundamentalist, that is actually a new thing. So it's not like Christians always took the Bible literally and then the Big Bang Theory came along and they changed how they saw the Bible. That's not really how it went down. So let's get into it here. Having said this, not all Christians embrace scientific progress. Following the example of some Christians in Darwin's time, who mocked and ridiculed evolution, An anti-science attitude can be seen in the rise of young earth creationism over the last 100 years. So there it is, you see, over the last 100 years, not really before that. These Christians hold that Genesis is literally true and that any attempt to undermine the story of the Bible is wrong and blasphemous. This view is held by a small but significant number of Christians, and many of these believers would argue that science is no threat to their faith at all, because the Bible will always have more authority for them than any scientific evidence. However, and this is where I'm doing some AO2, the fact that creationism is a recent development in Christian thought makes it clear that many Christians did, in fact, see the acceptance of scientific advances as a threat to their faith, and therefore doubled down on the view that the Bible must be the literal truth. This effectively shuts down all scientific arguments. Now, you might be thinking, but there's millions of people who take the Bible literally. Yeah, there are, but they're still the minority. You've got to remember there's nearly 3 billion Christians in the world. So, you know, a small percent of a very large number is still going to be a large number, but they're not the majority. It's not the mainstream Christian view that Genesis is literally factually correct, and it never really has been. The creationism, the young earth creationism thing came along as a pushback against Darwin. So it's quite important to remember that. Next bit. It's easy to counter the creationist argument, however, with the widely held Christian view that Genesis is theological text that was never meant to be taken literally or regarded as a scientific account of creation. It makes no sense to argue that the Bible is right and therefore science is wrong, when the biblical text is not trying to convey any kind of scientific truth, but rather moral and spiritual truth. So here, I'm doing a big bit of AO2. I'm making, quite a forceful point. It makes no sense to argue. So I'm saying, in my view, this is just wrong. But I'm going to back it up, and I'm going to back it up using Polkinghorne. You'll have studied Polkinghorne in Christianity and Science. Great person to use for this. This is the view of John Polkinghorne, a priest and scientist who saw no conflict between Christianity and science. For him, Genesis is an imaginative myth that conveys a deeper spiritual truth about the power and love of God, and therefore any conflict with scientific fact only arises when the text is misunderstood. Polkinghorne's argument is persuasive because it's clear from its historical and religious context that it's highly improbable, that's a little typo there, highly improbable that Genesis was written to be understood as literal truth, and it works on far more levels when understood metaphorically. Polkinghorne therefore seems to be right in arguing that science need not be an enemy of Christian faith. So I've made my point at the top of the paragraph, I've backed it up with Polkinghorne, I've unpacked a little bit of his thinking, so I've gone back into AO1 for a second, and then I end the paragraph by saying, because of what he's argued, I think Polkinghorne is right that science isn't an enemy of Christian faith. So I'm taking it right back to the statement. But because I'm having an argument, I need to take into account that there are different points of view, and Polkinghorne's arguments are good, but not perfect. So I do that here. However, not all of Polkinghorne's arguments are so sound. He argues that it's reasonable to believe in the God of classical theism because the universe is intelligible to us. Wow, this is full of typos. And our universe seems to be very well adapted to our needs. These arguments are similar to Paley's design arguments in that they are a fairly sound set of inductive principles, but Polkinghorne's view is threatened by multiverse theory. If it could be shown that our universe is only one of billions and therefore not special, merely a statistical outcome, Polkinghorne's argument would be severely undermined. So multiverse theory, you remember, is just the idea that actually there are billions and billions and billions of universes. And if that's the case, then eventually we will get a universe that's intelligible. But it doesn't mean that it was created. Think of it this way. If you get 6 dice and throw them over and over and over again, eventually you will get 6 sixes. That doesn't mean that those 6 sixes are special in any way. It just means that the law of large numbers says that it's going to come up. Now, Polkinghorne responds, back to the essay, that multiverse theory cannot be proved because other universes are unobservable. And he's right about that. But this too has problems because the God of classical theism is also unobservable. So he's basically saying he's willing to believe in God, but he's not willing to believe in multiple universes because the multiple universes are unobservable. Problem with that is God is unobservable too. So science may pose a legitimate threat to Christian faith, because even if you accept the principle that evidence of design in the world points to a designer, it does not follow that this designer must be the Christian God. This was one of Hume's key criticisms of design arguments. So I've managed to do a bit of a mashup in this paragraph between Polkinghorne, who's in the Christianity section of the course, and Paley's design argument, which is in the philosophy section of the course. Now, you don't need to obsess on how do I get 50% Christianity content, 50% philosophy content in. That doesn't matter. But it's really good if you can show that you understand there's a relationship between them. So doing things like this are quite nice to show that you understand that. Okay, now I've brought up Hume at the end of that paragraph, so I'm going to carry on with Hume here. As an empiricist, Hume would be likely to agree that science is an enemy of Christian faith. So an empiricist is someone who only accepts like tangible evidence of their senses. So whatever you've got the most evidence for, that's what you should believe. And a good quote from Hume is, "A wise man proportions his belief to the evidence." He's very, very big on evidence. He rejects miracles from a realist point of view on the grounds that he claims it would be impossible to prove in a satisfactory way that a miracle had taken place. He criticises miracle claims as wishful thinking or as ignorance, and this could be seen as a serious scientific threat to Christian faith, given that Christian belief depends on miracles such as the incarnation and the resurrection. Now, you might be thinking, why would you go into miracles in an essay on religion and science? But you can do it here, because if Hume's right, and if we could never be scientifically satisfied that a miracle has taken place, and we'd be happy to say miracles don't happen, then we've undermined a hell of a lot of Christian beliefs there, particularly everything to do with Jesus. So that could be quite a big deal. But we can push back, we can deal with it. However, it's easy to remove this threat by taking an anti-realist view of miracles, as Maurice Wiles does. So again, in the miracles topic, you have to do Hume versus Wiles. You can bring it in here. Like Polkinghorne, Wiles does not agree that God would intervene arbitrarily, so randomly, to break his own laws of nature. So miracles should therefore be viewed in terms of impact on believers, rather than being seen as direct interventions of God and events in themselves. The incarnation and resurrection are still meaningful and inspirational to many Christians, even if they're understood as spiritually true rather than literally true. While an anti-realist view of miracles is not satisfactory to all Christians, it does solve some of the scientific objections that have been raised by empiricists such as Hume and atheists such as Dawkins. So you can push back on the miracles thing by saying, well, miracles aren't trying to be scientific. Miracles aren't really anything to do with science. They're spiritual truth, they're theological truth. The effect of miracle stories is what does it do to believers rather than what actually literally happened. Okay, let's push on to the end. Overall, I disagree that science is an enemy of Christian faith. This is because it seems clear from the arguments discussed above that ultimately scientific knowledge and the knowledge of God that comes from faith are two completely different things, so it does not make sense to see them as contradictory. Science can help Christians understand the world around them, but scientific knowledge alone cannot explain the deepest mysteries of life. To use Polkinghorne's analogy, music can be expressed as a changing pattern of air pressure, but that's not the point of the music. In the same way, the scientific method can only take our understanding so far. If too simple an approach is taken, I agree that science can be seen as an enemy of Christian faith, another typo there, but a more sophisticated examination of issues, such as the nature of miracles and the meaning of the Genesis text, shows us that this conflict only exists at surface level, and in fact, Christianity and science can exist in mutually supportive harmony. Okay, so that was about 1,200 words. You could, like I've said for all of these, you could write a bit less than that and it would still be very good. I think that would get level 5. I think that would probably be close to full marks. Because I've covered a lot of ground, I've got an argument, I've stuck to the question, and I've got a good blend of AO1 and AO2. So if you want to ask me any questions about this essay or about any of the others I've written, please feel free to drop a comment and I'll get back to you. Exam's getting close now, so good luck with your revision. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, tell your friends, and I'll see you very soon.